All right, Conspiracy College, June 8th still. We are still in Monroe. We're painting the room. What?
Speak up.
We're taking a break now, having some drumsticks. And we thought this would be a good time to introduce the YouTube audience to the method of discussion used in the Conspiracy College. Just during learning periods. Or what's a better way to put it? It's the method of learning. It's a method of discourse. It's called the Socratic Van Tillian dialogue. Of course, you know what dialogue means. You probably have a vague idea of a Socratic dialogue, but I'll let Dad explain real quick what the Van Tillian part of the dialogue is. So, Dad?
Well, in the history of the Christian right, there was three major thinkers, of which Cornelius Van Til was considered to be the intellectual philosophical leader, and broke new ground in his belief that you couldn't understand reality apart from having God speak into time and space. So the Socratic Van Tillian became the twin opposites of studying theology as if your life absolutely depended on it, your sanity depended on it, reality depended on it. I mean, if you didn't know that God had spoken into time and space in a way that you could understand, there wasn't any reason for you personally not to commit suicide, or for a culture not to commit suicide, but because God had given direction and law, there was a basis for reality. The other side of the Socratic was that once you were somewhat, as a finite person, confident in the infinite being real and giving direction towards our individual lives and our corporate life as civilizations and nations, then you had the freedom to be unafraid of any other kind of thinking, and that was the Socratic angle. So personally, the way I educated my children was to put the fear of God in them. Good God, bad devil, you want to go to heaven, obey God. You want to go to hell, don't obey God. And if you want to have an irrational life, don't obey God. So on the one hand, the Van Tillian was the importance of theology and presupposing God's existence. But once you did that, once you had that security, the joy was you could study, read any literature, any philosophy, and have a real confidence to enjoy man's search for truth, because out of that you're going to glean incredible wisdom. So there was a balance, a sort of yin and yang to having the Socratic discussions, and then about the experiential, the subjective, what man has done, versus the absolute of the Van Tillian.
Okay, that's good. A little bit long-winded for some of the audience. Let me see if I can give it to you in a slightly more simplified version.
Elaborate.
When you're talking about any subject, when you're discussing it, you're having a dialogue, whether it's religion, psychology, politics, building a house, whatever it is. You're from the Van Tillian perspective, you're presupposing that a higher intelligence made everything possible. And you're coming from everything you look at, all the data you're gleaning from whatever you're reading or whatever you're talking about, you're looking at it from that perspective, that there was a higher intelligence behind it, and that's what caused it. Now, from the Socratic side, that's from the existential position that, as far as you know, you are the highest intelligence that you're aware of. So everything has to be viewed from that perspective, because that's really the only verifiable intelligence that you have access to. Or Socratically, it's just you're only believing what feels correct to you internally based on any number of things. But just the difference is Socratic is based on, or it's presupposing yourself as the highest intelligence, and the Van Tillian side is presupposing an other as the highest intelligence. Mm-hmm. And if you look at any subject from both of those angles, all your bases are covered. Nobody can bring another perspective in that can that's going to dismantle any conclusions you come to if you come to it from looking at it from both those sides.
And as a guest on Conspiracy College, I just want to say specifically to the Conspiracy College audience and to its students is that I think once you become convinced that God is in control of history, then you have the courage, even if you're not a very courageous person, to stand up against the conspiracy, and even if you have to give your life. Colin, could you talk about the Solzhenitsyn quote that so impressed me, what he said about if they had stood together? Back to Colin.
Well, I don't know what that has to do with it.
Because that's the way you kick a conspiracy's ass.
Solzhenitsyn was a Russian writer. The Russian establishment obviously became corrupt and completely tyrannical. I'm not going to say communism's tyrannical or whatever form of government they were under at that time. They became a tyrannical regime. And they arrested all of the individual people who might be a threat to that regime, which was a massive amount. They rounded them up. You've heard of it. They threw them in the gulag. It's what Stalin did. And he did it because the individual is a threat to a tyrannical regime. We are under a tyrannical regime right now. It's a global tyrannical regime, and it's very subversive. It's very behind the scenes right now. It's slowly externalizing itself. But in Solzhenitsyn's day, for whatever reason, that government became tyrannical, and they rounded up all the patriots, and they arrested them. And Solzhenitsyn was talking about when he was in prison how they just burned with resentment at themselves, because whenever they'd been rounded up, it was 100 to 1. And if one person had decided to fight back, it would have ruined the enemy's complete plan. So they had allowed themselves, their apathy or their fear of the government, their fear of the establishment, as kind of equating the establishment with God. You don't question the establishment. That was ultimately their undoing, their own apathy and their own fear. And so, as a writer, that's what he was trying to say to the public, is that apathy is the fertile ground that tyranny grows in.
7 minutes.
Okay, we're at 7 minutes. But not that this is a Socratic Van Tillian discussion we're having, because if we were talking about the government that Solzhenitsyn was under, we would have to look at it from two different angles. Is there a higher intelligence, a deity, a god above that government that's being tyrannical to the people? Or is that government the highest form of intelligence, and therefore its will is supreme because it's the most powerful, it can do whatever it wants with the citizens? Or is the citizen, is the individual the supreme? There's just so many different angles, and this is the Socratic Van Tillian way of discussing the subject.